Today on Locked On Canadians, we want to talk about how the new NCAA/CHL rules could impact draft picks. We want to talk about how the Canadians could derail their own rebuild and hope they don't go that way. And then finally, our long national nightmare of the Trevor Zegras saga is over. We're going to talk about that too and how it affects the Montreal Canadiens.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canadiens. We want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Laura Saba, also known as the Active Stick. You might know my work from Habs and Eyes on the Prize back in the day. I was also a producer on Hockey Primetime, and I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, formerly of Rabbit Habs and the Build podcast, but I stole him. Ian Boisvert, also known as maybe it's Ian all over social media. Ian, it is sweltering. The heat is oppressive, but we're talking about ice hockey. How are you doing?
Yeah, it almost feels silly to be talking about hockey when it's 11-5 degrees out. Like it's just it's stupid hot.
It is hot.
For the peek behind the curtain, I was trying to do some research on our first topic, the draft rules. And I went to go type rules and I typed in ROOLS and I'm chalking it up to the heat. So that's how hot it is. It's so hot I can't spell. But we are going to talk about these things. I think it will have a big impact on how the draft plays out at the end of the week.
Absolutely. So that's what we're going to talk about first, and then we're going to talk about how the Canadiens could derail their rebuild and what we want them to avoid. And then finally, we do have to talk about Trevor Zegras because it finally happened, and not to the Montreal Canadiens, but it will have an effect on our team. So let's get right into it. So, there was a very underrated part of the new rules that you were just telling me about that I wasn't really thinking about up until this point. I honestly did not consider the fact that it could have an impact on how teams behave at this upcoming draft because the new rules kick in right after, right?
Yeah. So to set the stage here, so before this new set of rules was put in place, anyone playing major junior hockey in Canada, so in any of the CHL leagues, the QMJHL, the OHL, or the WHL, they were not permitted to play NCAA hockey. They were essentially barred from the league or from the NCAA because they were not considered amateurs at that point. And that's why in other sports, once you get drafted into whatever league you're going into, you're done with NCAA. Basketball, you leave the league immediately. Hockey, they've already kind of built in that, yes, you can get drafted, but so long as you don't go play for those teams, you can stay in college hockey. Now, the rules are changing where effective August 1st, players that who have played in the Canadian Hockey League will be eligible to play NCAA hockey, provided that they were never compensated above their necessary expenses prior to enrolling in college. So there's a bit of red tape there, but I can imagine, especially with all of the money going around in NCAA now with their the deals that some of these players are getting, I would imagine none of that's really going to matter. But what this matters for is the rights, how long each team holds the rights of their draft picks. So it depends on what league they're getting pulled from and how old they are. Canadian Major Junior League players who stayed in Major Junior through their age 20 season, you get them for 2 years after their draft. It's 4 years if they leave junior before their age 20 season. It's 4 years from Europe before leaving before age 20. It's 2 years in Europe when they leave at age 20 or over. And the NCAA has always been 4 years. You get 4 years for players who became college students and left college before their graduation year. So you essentially are now changing a little bit of the timeline for some of these players. There's some thought that some agents and players think that players who leave the juniors and go to college will have 2 years added to their rights. Some players and teams don't think that's true. They're still I think they were waiting for some clarification heading into the Board of Governors. I don't know that that's necessarily been provided yet. So there's reason to believe that there might be some shockwaves from this in the draft at the end of this week. We might be looking at teams trying to go the NCAA route more often, or more prospects in the future deciding to go play NCAA hockey. The last few years of the NCAA for ice hockey have been really, really great. Like the tournaments are great. The level of competition has really stepped up in recent years. I think that's in no small part to the fact that USA, the National Training and Development Program has done really well in developing all these players. But I think you might end up having a lot of guys who are in the Canadian Hockey League going, why am I here? I can go play at Michigan and win and try to play for a national championship, go to Boston College or Boston University. Do you think that this is going to have let's focus on this year's draft specifically. Like, do you think teams will change their philosophy going into this, knowing that these rules are coming and that maybe the rights of the players they select might change after the fact?
I think this time around, because there's still a lot of confusion and clarity was not necessarily provided, I think they might be a little bit more cautious, but I certainly think that it does give them more to think about, right? I think anything that puts more rights in the players' hands is a good thing. Like this is like for me a really positive thing. Obviously, giving them more choice, it helps a lot, but there is that risk. And I think the reason the rule was in place was the risk of lowering the talent level in on either side, right?
Yeah.
And I would understand that because it would be tempting for like it could be tempting for NCAA players, it could be tempting for CHL players. Personally, I think that this time around, there's probably going to be some guys that are like, okay, let's test this out and see, and then other teams are going to be looking at that in the future and learning from it's like the offer sheets too. Like nobody wants to start doing it, but
Mhm.
now that like there have been a few successful ones, maybe this off season we're going to see a lot more, right?
Yeah, I think the way that this might play out is that, teams might go to interview some players at the draft combine, and try to get an idea of what they're thinking they're going to do next season. And maybe you're talking to a player in the queue who, yes, he could go back to the queue, but the level of play in the queue isn't to where it's been in recent memory, right? Like there's rarely, high quality players coming out, or I should say, you know, superstar players coming out of that league. Maybe you're talking to a player out of the queue going, "Hey, we want to take you, but we think that you should go to college next year." And now that player will be eligible to. They weren't necessarily before. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of this in trying to understand, where these guys want to play is obviously first and foremost what's most important. The families have a lot of say in this. But I think if a team was approaching, like, let's just use Justin Carbonneau as an example, right? Because he's probably the second ranked player to come out of the queue in this year's draft. If the Canadians go to this player and say, "Hey, we really want to take you, but we think you should go and play in the NCAA and play against tougher competition, try to win a national championship, go to Michigan and play with Michael Hage. We'd like to see you go and do those things." It obviously would depend on what, if the player has any interest and those teams have any interest in bringing in that player. But I think that's, to me, what I would look at as the most. Like, I think after this year's draft, we're going to see a lot of players say that they're committed to playing college hockey next year. I really think that that's sort of the direction that we're going to head in.
I think that's really like I think that's a possibility. But one thing that I do want to note is that the Montreal Canadiens are probably going to be at the forefront of this. The reason that I say that is because of Kent Hughes' familiarity, not just with NCAA players, but just with the rules and how everything works, right? Like he has that background. And I feel like if anyone is going to have those types of conversations or gear themselves towards those types of players, like it will be Kent Hughes. And I think he might be the very like at the very beginning of that, right? Like the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think these rule changes are good for players. Like if you're pro labor, this is something you should be in favor of. It's players having more of a right to choose where they go and especially, not only develop in the sense of their hockey careers, but now you get to go and get a really solid education from, some very, very highly ranked schools. Like I think we talked, Jayden Struble was yesterday's player review. It was very important to him to finish out school. It was
Yeah.
very important to him. He played 4 years in the NCAA. It It was very important to Jordan Harris to go through the school system and to come out the other side with an education. Like, it's important to these guys. I know with athletes and college degrees, a lot of people kind of thumb their nose at it. It's like, oh, they're just there to play hockey. A lot of these guys are thinking about life after hockey. And I think for more players in the CHL, maybe they get to a point where they realize, oh crap, like, I don't know that I'm going to make the NHL. Why don't I go and get an education, also play D1 and see what happens? And now I'm sort of filling out both sides of my future repertoire. This is good news for the players. And I think the teams will adapt and they'll find ways to benefit from this system as well. But first and foremost, the players should be pretty stoked that this is something they can do now.
Absolutely. All right, we are going to move back into the Canadiens rebuild. Last week we talked about changes they could make to get closer to contention. Today we're going to talk about changes we do not want to make them. We do not want to see them make because it could derail their rebuild entirely. That's coming up in just one moment. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety because it's so easy. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, whether I'm on a road trip, or I just need a quick boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. And honestly, they're so easy. It's just they're so delicious, so easy. Whether you're running around, a lot of you have busy days, like running after your kids. Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right. In our final segment, I do want to say, in addition to talking about Trevor Zegras, both of us are going to share the resources we always go to for draft coverage, because there's a few of them that we want to talk about. We want to tell you guys about because there are go-tos. In the meantime, let's get back to the topic at hand. Last week, we talked about changes the Montreal Canadiens could make to get closer to contention. Today, we're going to talk about changes we do not want to see them make, because it could derail their rebuild entirely. And I have to say, this is born out of, like, I didn't steal the idea. I got the idea for browsing Reddit, where I can't remember if it was the other day, like if it was on the weekend. I think it was on the weekend. Somebody started a thread about which team is the most hopeless, and the almost universal answer was the Buffalo Sabres. And then there was some Pittsburgh in there. There were some other contenders. And then on the flip side, somebody started a thread asking which team's fans have the most reason to hope, and Montreal and San Jose came out clearly on top. There were every year people say New Jersey, and then this time around there were far fewer New Jersey responses, and there were a lot of Montreal and San Jose responses. And Montreal came out very favorably. So it looks like it's universally accepted that we have a lot to be excited about here in Montreal. But I wanted to talk about what they should avoid doing that could derail their rebuild entirely. Ian, I gave you like 10 minutes to think about it. Do you have any thoughts first?
Yeah, first I want to say, to the point of everyone being very excited about the state of this rebuild, you should be. This is the part that you should be most excited about, because it's all magic beans. It's all of our prospects are going to hit. They're better than everybody else's. No one's going to stop us. That's sort of the mentality that we're all in. And there's some reason to believe in every single one of these prospects. The problem is that, quite honestly, in the scope of rebuild, this is the easy part. The losing and getting high picks and getting really talented hockey players is the easy part. The tough part is team building, is building an actual NHL roster around that core that you've collected. We already see a lot of the holes that the Canadiens have, right? We know down the middle they need some more help below Nick Suzuki. We know that. They need help on the right side eventually. We know that. They're hoping they have the answer in goal, for present and future. But if that doesn't happen, like, you're gonna have to take some more swings in net. I tend to think the Canadiens have the net figured out. But You never know. You never know with any of these guys. So when you mentioned this to me, the first thing that came to my mind, and I hate to do this to this guy, but the Carl Alsner type contracts cannot happen. Like those are the ones that kill you. And it wasn't like he was making $18 million a year, right? But he was making just enough where his sub NHL replacement level play became an actual draw on the team. Like those are the kinds of things that you cannot have happen when you're trying to become a year after year Stanley Cup contender. You look around, like Florida doesn't have any contracts like that. I guess Edmonton doesn't, but didn't Edmonton, they had Cody Ceci last year and he wasn't expensive, but Cody Ceci is exactly the kind of defenseman that you should not be hanging out with. You know? So like that to me, it's the emotional support defenseman that a lot of these general managers fall over themselves to go get, that they cost way too much money and their play never matches up to what that contract takes up on your ledger. Are you worried about that kind of player and contract as much as I like? I'm constantly like, they're going to sign somebody like this and it's going to suck.
Let me tell you why I'm not worried about that. Because, you know, you have your emotional support defense, but then you also have your emotional support fourth liners, right?
Yeah.
You have those guys that you spend way too much trading for, or you signed to too long for too much money. Kent Hughes is not a former fringe NHL player. That is the biggest reason I have faith, because, and neither is Jeff Molson. And so the reason that I say this is because the GMs that fall in love with those types of guys and overpay them are GMs that see themselves in those guys. And Kent Hughes does not see
GMs
himself
that were
in any
those guys. Mark Bergevin was that guy. Like,
exactly.
Go look at his hockey DB. He was that guy.
Exactly that. Exactly that. So that's why I'm not too worried about it with Kent Hughes. Like Kent Hughes, he was a smart guy, right? Like he wants those cerebral smart players, which that's who he sees himself in. So I'm not as worried with this, but I get it, because every GM has one of those. And we have kind of had those conversations about, like, Kent Hughes trading for his emotional support guys with like Alex Newhook or Justin Barron. It's guys that their talent has not projected to what he expected, right? But to his credit, he's willing to pivot from those decisions that he makes, right? We talked a lot about how married he might have been to the Justin Barron idea, and it turns out it wasn't that bad. He was like, all right, you go away and get me some, come back, let me have something that's going to work. I think
we don't talk about that trade enough, by the way. We don't talk about that trade being as consequential as it ended up being.
Yeah.
Go get him, Justin Barron. Like, I hope you find a spot in the NHL, because I think that's a good kid. But like, to get Alex Carrier with that player is just kind of, I don't understand how that happened. And I don't understand how 30 other teams didn't make that same trade.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we are going to talk about Zegras in a few minutes, but I think my biggest thing is for obviously not to be married to a certain type of player for too long, just because you gave assets up, or you paid him too much or whatever. Like I feel like I need them to have the ability and desire to be able to move on quickly from mistakes, which we all want to do, right? The other thing that I want is for them not to introduce or allow any element of celebrity behavior within the locker room. There are players on this team that are superstars or superstar potential and a potential to be elite, right? Like you have your Nick Suzuki, you have your Ivan Demidov, you have the potential, in Cole Caulfield and Juraj Slafkovsky, right? You've got Lane Hudson. And if you look at that locker room, if you look at the way they behave, they play for each other. They play for Marty and they play for each other, right? But as soon as you start allowing any kind of animosity or any kind of that kind of behavior, I find that it poisons a locker room and you never really get it back, right? Just look at Vancouver. Vancouver is the biggest.
They're a perfect example. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, the one thing you need to avoid doing is, I think of a guy like Evander Kane in Edmonton, right? Like that is a guy who has a skill set that the Oilers needed. But was he a good fit for that team? I don't necessarily know that that's true. And if you're the Montreal Canadiens or any team that's rebuilding, trying to take that next step, the one thing you cannot do is sacrifice sort of, I won't say the culture, but your identity to just get a guy who fills a role that you need, because it's more than that. The Florida Panthers only get Florida Panthers. The Boston Bruins only get Boston Bruins. They don't get these guys that don't make any sense. And when you get those guys that don't make sense, like Lindholm in Boston right now, they stick out like a sore thumb. Like you're not a Boston Bruin. Like if the Florida Panthers were to get Marco Rossi, I'd be like, what are you guys doing? That makes no sense for who you guys are, right? Like that's exactly the kind of thing I'm thinking of. You have to find not only these players that you need to fill certain roles, but they have to match with the mesh, the mix that you already have.
Yes, absolutely. Which is not saying, and everyone's going to be like, oh, they're just going to get a bunch of small forwards. No, that's not what we're saying. It's not a bunch of small forwards. It is a culture, an identity, and a type of person, right? And I do think the Montreal Canadiens can get tougher, they can get meaner, and they can get more physical without sacrificing the thinking and skill parts of their game. And I think that's the crucial element here, is that yes, they can afford to be more physical, they can afford to be bigger, they can afford to be tougher, but they cannot sacrifice the intelligence, the cohesion, the skill, and what they're building right now. So like that's essentially my biggest fear with the Montreal Canadiens and how they could derail their rebuild. You guys tell us what you think in the comments. Like, what are you worried about? What are you scared of? And don't say a bunch of small forwards, because I already covered that. Like, be creative. All right. Speaking of players that are like, why are you on this team? Trevor Zegras got traded to the Philadelphia Flyers earlier today, and we're going to discuss that and how it relates to the Canadiens in a second. All right, Ian, before we get into the segment and talk about Trevor Zegras, who are the people that you always read and look up when you are getting ready for the draft? We already talked about the Elite Prospects annual whole thing. I can't call it a guide. It's like it's a whole thing.
Yeah, to call it a guide is underselling it. The Elite Prospects draft Bible that they create every year is just, I'm gonna have it next to me while I'm watching the draft, just so I'm understanding what's going on, and I will feel very much that I am well informed going into that draft. So they are first and foremost. We should toe the company line, Laura. Our Locked On Prospects, our friend Sebastian High, still running a great program over there. You should
also
be
one Elite Prospects.
also there.
They just have all the like all the people on there. Like we listen to them. Sometimes we have them on. Like those are our go-tos. But yes, Sebastian High will also be a core part of our draft coverage on Friday night. So look out for that. And it's not just to toe the company line. We love Sebastian.
No, for sure. We're very fortunate that he also is a Locked On host. Like that's it. It works out that we hire some pretty great people here. Yeah, I mean, I would say too that the Hockey PDOcast, their mock draft that they did the first 16 picks. It was Cam Robinson, Dmitry Filipovich, the host of the Hockey PDOcast, and Chris Peters. They went through and they gave rationale for each pick. They kind of made picks based on what they thought and sort of what will actually play out on draft night, which I found to be, that's always a given take with the draft, is like, this should happen, but there's 32 general managers and all of their scouting staffs out there. It won't be what happens. So I find that there's a lot of great resources. Use the comments as a place to tell other people your favorite places to get this sort of content from. It's a good, we should always be shouting out things that you support. On the internet, you vote with your time and your money. We're not asking you for your money. We're asking you for your time. So, and a lot of these other people are as well. So sharing is always the best when it comes to these draft guides, because everyone has opinions, and it's nice to feel informed going into the draft.
So I'm just going to shout out a few of mine. Jerome Berube of hockeyprospect.com. Definitely somebody that I'm always reading and listening to. And then there's Briser la Glace, which is a French language podcast that I listen to. Our good friend Tony Ferrari, like I read and listen to / watch the videos of everything that he does. He is like he presents a lot of knowledge in a very accessible way. One thing that I love that he does is you send him 2 players and then he will do a comparison between them. Like if you're the GM, like, you know, and you're trying to compare 2 players. Hockey prospecting
Yeah,
is
it's
Byron
a great
Bader's
one.
model. It's like it's a fantastic model. We've had him on in the past, and a lot of people really appreciated what he had to bring. So hockey prospecting is another one. Scouting. Will
I was
Scouch.
going to say Scouching too. I get his clips all the time. I love Scouching so much.
Yes.
Yes, you should be watching Scouching.
Scouting is awesome, also very accessible. And anyone that I forgot today, we will say tomorrow. All right, we got to talk about Trevor Zegras real quick. Let's talk about how the Philadelphia Flyers essentially sent a bag of pucks over for Trevor Zegras. I know that's mean, but it's fairly true.
It's not wrong, Laura. I mean, and I feel at least that Montreal Canadiens fans are uniquely qualified because one of those players was a player that we picked in Ryan Poehling.
Yeah.
It's funny to me that the Jeff Petrie trade tree now involves Trevor Zegras, so that's a really fun aspect of this that I thought of as soon as it happened. I was like, oh, that's now part of the Jeff Petrie lore. So that's incredible. We love to see that. I was when Elliot Friedman comes out and he says, "Hey, keep an eye on this player," which is insider for this trade is happening probably within the next couple of hours. Like they'll never say it outright, but that's exactly what it always means. And then sure enough, he's going to Philly a little bit after that. And I thought
it means someone texted Elliot before submitting the trade to the NHL to be approved.
Right? Yeah, it's pending the trade call, and we just need you to know.
Yeah.
I think that at the time I thought this is probably going to be stupid expensive, and Montreal doesn't need a player who's not going to play center for it to cost that much to acquire him. So I would want nothing to do with it. And then I saw the return, a second, a fourth, and Ryan Poehling, and I went, I could have been in at that price. I mean, I know that Trevor Zegras isn't exactly what the Canadiens need, but if that's the value for a player like that, I'm kind of shocked at how badly Anaheim fumbled the bag on this one. Like, it just seems like they twirled in the air for 3 years and then just fell on their face at the end.
So as soon as this happened, I texted you guys. Like, we have a little group chat with our good friend Scott Matla, who may or may not be appearing on the show sometime this week. I said, well, you know what? Like, I've been telling all of our listeners who keep talking about Mason McTavish that it's not going to happen. But seeing this, I think maybe there's a possibility that it could happen.
You should be calling Pat Verbeek several times a day. I just don't think that he's up for this. I really struggled to see what the goal is in Anaheim. He seems to think that they are ready to take the next step in that they acquired Jacob Trouba last year, and they got Chris Kreider this year, and they might take a big swing at a free agent.
They're going to go for Mitch Marner.
Sure. Will Mitch Marner go for Anaheim? I don't necessarily know. But to do all of that and then say, Trevor Zegras, one of our first picks of this rebuild, you're gone. Like, it just seems very bizarre. They've really bungled this player's value. I know he got hurt this year. I know he's not that strong defensively, but offensively, this is a very potent player. And I think that they wanted him to be a Selke player, and that's just not who that is. And instead of insulating that player and putting him in positions to succeed, they decided, you're too difficult for us, get out. And I find that is especially telling of a team that just sort of has given up. He's about to be a restricted free agent after this season, so they just didn't want anything to do with that, and they'd rather just take the bag of pucks and hope that they can do something with it. And hey, Ryan Poehling, they got a bottom six forward.
Yeah. And I just think the other flip side of this is that, is Trevor Zegras a Philadelphia type of player?
No. And I mean, like, people are saying, well, Tortorella's not there anymore, so maybe it makes some sense.
But he's Rick Tocchet.
Just the history of the Philadelphia Flyers. Remember just a minute ago where I said the Panthers only get Panthers and the Bruins only get Bruins? The Flyers should not be getting players like Trevor Zegras. As talented as he is, it doesn't mix with what that team's psyche is. It doesn't mix with the zeitgeist of the Philadelphia Flyers since their inception. Like, it's just very bizarre to me.
Absolutely. And so for me, like this is, you know, I don't feel like the Montreal Canadiens missed out because I don't think that Trevor Zegras, like, I'm sure they kicked the can. I'm sure they kicked the tires, whatever you call it. It's kicking the tires, right? Kicking the
Yeah,
can is like making something delayed.
you're procrastinating. Yeah,
Yes, you're procrastinating. So I'm sure they kicked the tires. I'm sure they thought about him. But then, a bunch of things changed this year, right? Like maybe this time last year they thought he was the guy, but a bunch of things changed. And I think they're probably still looking for that other second line winger in addition to that second line center that they need. Like I
sure.
think that those two are things that they want and that they rightfully should be looking for. I don't think that Trevor Zegras was going to be it. Just because I don't think the Canadians are in the business of insulating players on their top two lines. I think they don't want that. I think they want their top two lines to be machines that you're terrified of, right? That's what
Yep.
they want. Like Florida has that in a different way, but Florida
Yeah.
has that, right? They want everybody on that top six to be defensively sound, offensively creative, offensively gifted and aggressive, but like just guys who make things happen. They don't need you. They don't need you. Like they don't need to be bashing your head in while they do it, but they need to be some like players that you like the way that the top line was against the top defensive pairing of the Washington Capitals. That's what they want in that top six, right?
Yeah.
So Trevor Zegras in that way is not a Montreal Canadiens player.
Who's the next distressed forward asset to switch teams between Philly and Anaheim? So it went from Cutter Gauthier, who just said, "I ain't playing for you," and they traded him at a reduced rate. Now Zegras goes back the other way. When do we get angry Matvey Michkov requests a trade and is now an Anaheim Duck? Like I just feel like that's, or you know what? Let's not
Mitch
say
Marner.
Michkov. That's no, not even Mitch Marner. I would say like the next one's probably um who's the player they got from Florida? The pick that they got from, or the prospect they got from Florida for Claude Giroux. I can't remember his name. Owen Tippett. Owen
Yes.
Tippett going back the other way. Like that's the next logical progression to me, is that's the player that gets sent back, and they're gonna do that dance until one of them gets fired.
Yeah. Or one of them wins a cup. How funny would it be?
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
it would be really funny to watch Trevor Zegras just show up and become an actual god and lead
in
the Flyers
Philadelphia.
into the promised land.
Yeah.
After I just absolutely cursed myself by saying he doesn't fit there at all.
All right. I said that too. So you
Yeah,
guys can blame us if this happens. All right. Is it time for our trivia so we can get out of
it is. It's very hot in this room. I need to leave, so we're doing trivia. All right. Yesterday's question, we did Jayden Struble's player review. So I asked, Jayden Struble is not a one-sport athlete. In 2014, he represented his home of Cumberland, Rhode Island, in this tournament. Laura, do you know the answer?
Yes, the Little League World Series.
Yes, he played in the Little League World Series for Cumberland, Rhode Island. They won their regional, so they became the Northeastern regional team in the big part of the tournament. They were knocked out in the elimination rounds. It's a double elimination tournament. He played first base. He bat third in the lineup. The game that I kind of watched him play, he had a nice hit to right field. He batted lefty. His nickname was J-Dog, and his favorite player was Mike Trout. So I just really enjoyed that glimpse back into Jayden Struble's childhood. Essentially, he was a boy, and I watched him play baseball, which was very funny. Super Rain, Paul Giardetti, Judges Football, and Alexander Christian got it right. Alexander Christian also added a fun fact in here that Cumberland, Rhode Island is also the home of the ice cream machine. So I love to learn. Thank you for also teaching me something. That was really nice. So thanks
I
for
like
getting the
it.
question right and for playing along. And knowing that Jayden Struble played in the Little League World Series is just really funny. I don't know why. I find it really endearing to me. All right.
It's very much like how Tom Brady was drafted by the Expos.
Yes, exactly, for sure. It's very much that same like just novelty fact that
Yeah.
I will carry with me. Jayden Struble might win a cup one day. I'm like, he played in the Little League World Series. Like I'll just know that. There's stuff in my brain I could have space for that is now gone because I need to know that he played in the Little League World Series. All right, today's question. This episode is dropping on June 24th. The last time the Habs made a trade on June 24th, they actually made two on the same day. In one, they acquired a player for 2 draft picks, and in the other, they traded a player for 2 draft picks. Who were the players involved in these deals on June 24th, the last time the Canadiens made a trade on June 24th? If you have the answer, put it in the comments down below. We'll shout you out on tomorrow's episode of the show.
You heard the man. And you can get in touch with us many, many different ways. We are on Blue Sky at Locked On Canadians. We are on TikTok at Locked On Canadians. We're on Instagram at Locked On Canadians. And our Gmail is Locked On Canadians. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. We're free and available, as you know. You can find my co-host on social media, maybe Etienne. You can find me at The Active Stick. And for those of you in Quebec, Bonne Saint-Jean, we will see you all tomorrow.